That pisses me off running top 10 and missing it. That was Shane van Gisbergen after the Martinsville race. Not a vague frustration. Not diplomatic racing speak. Raw, direct anger from a driver who had just delivered one of the best oval performances of his Cup Series career and still had nothing to show for it in the top 10 column. Here is the full picture. Van Gisbergen qualified 5th. He collected stage points in both Stage 1 and Stage 2. He reached as high as 2nd place during the race itself. And when the checkered flag dropped over Martinsville's famous half-mile paperclip, he crossed the line in 11th. One single position outside the top 10. One spot. After 400 laps of racing. That is the kind of result that burns. But to understand why this performance actually matters and why the NASCAR world is paying serious attention, you have to go back to the beginning of the weekend. Let's start with qualifying, because what Van Gisbergen did on that lap deserves its own conversation. He put his number 97 Superfile Chevrolet 5th. That is a career-best oval qualifying result in the Cup Series. Before Martinsville 2026, his best oval qualifying effort was 10th at New Hampshire the previous year. But the number that truly tells the story is this. At Martinsville itself, Van Gisbergen started 22nd just 1 year ago. Going from 22nd to 5th at the same track in 1 year is a massive jump by any standard in NASCAR. Now here is the detail that makes it even more impressive. In practice, his car was only 34th fastest. 34th. On race day pace, he was buried in the field. But when qualifying came around, he delivered a lap just 0.064 seconds off Denny Hamlin's pole time. That is 64 thousandths of a second, separating him from the fastest qualifier on the entire grid. He also outqualified every single one of his TrackHouse Racing team. Ross Chastain, a driver who literally wall rode his way into NASCAR history at this very track in 2022, qualified 18th. Rookie Connor Zilick was back in 25th. Van Gisbergen was 5th. But there is one more layer to this qualifying story that makes it genuinely remarkable. Before the race, Van Gisbergen openly discussed switching from right foot braking to left foot braking on ovals. At Martinsville, where downshifting is a constant requirement, adapting to a completely new braking technique mid-season is not a small adjustment. To physically prevent himself from reverting to old habits, he put big spacing between his pedals, so he physically can't go back to right foot braking. His own words on the challenge. It's a lot of timing and repetition that I'm not used to. He qualified 5th while simultaneously rewiring his braking muscle memory. That is not something an average driver does. Denny Hamlin grabbed the pole, his 49th career pole, and 5th at Martinsville. William Byron went 2nd, Josh Berry 3rd, Ty Gibbs 4th. Van Gisbergen was 5th, ahead of every other non-big team driver on the grid. The race itself was 400 laps around Martinsville Speedway. And from the moment the green flag dropped, Van Gisbergen was exactly where he needed to be. Stage 1 went cleanly for the number 97. He settled in a 6th from the green flag and held his position comfortably. Up front, Hamlin took control of the race early, leading the first 38 laps before briefly losing the lead to Byron after getting stuck behind a lap car. He reclaimed it almost immediately. The stage ended under caution when Cody were spun off John Hunter Nemechek's bumper on lap 77. Hamlin won the stage. Van Gisbergen crossed 6th and picked up his first batch of stage points. Stage 2 continued in a similar pattern. Van Gisbergen reported the car was pretty decent, but noted he was starting to have trouble with grip coming off the corners, a detail that would become more significant later. A caution flew on lap 105 when A.J. Allmendinger spun Noah Gragson. Hamlin swept both stages. Van Gisbergen finished 8th in Stage 2 and added more stage points to his total. Across both stages, he collected 8 bonus points. 8 points that, in the context of NASCAR's 2026 chase format, are anything but trivial. These are the quiet, grinding points that separate drivers who make the playoffs from drivers who spend October watching from home. Stage 3 is where this race became a genuine story, and where the real frustration was born. Van Gisbergen and crew chief Stephen Doran made a bold call. On lap 268, they brought the number 97 down pit road early, executing an undercut strategy. Chase Elliott had made a similar call on lap 261. The gamble worked. Once the pit cycle completed, Van Gisbergen had jumped to second place, running directly behind Elliott and ahead of Hamlin. A driver from New Zealand, still learning oval racing, was running second at Martinsville with laps remaining. But the undercut comes with a built-in cost. Pitting early means your tires are older than everyone who pitted later. Cars with fresher rubber started working their way past him, and Van Gisbergen began sliding back through the running order. Then a race was completely transformed by two separate events. First, a debris caution on lap 312 changed the complexion of the entire finish. Elliott was running second when a yellow came out, and his team brought him in for a free pit stop, taking on fresh tires without losing a single lap of track position. It was a massive advantage for the number 9 team, and it effectively set up Elliott to challenge for the win. Second, on the restart on lap 324, chaos broke out almost immediately. Bubba Wallace drove into the back of Carson Hocevar, spinning him around. Zane Smith got caught up in the incident as well. The result was a 12-car pileup that ended Wallace's day completely, his car damaged beyond repair. He finished 36th and dropped from 3rd to 11th in the championship standings as a consequence. Out of this chaos, Van Gisbergen received fresh tires and lined up 9th for the next restart. He had a clear path into the top 10, and that is exactly when his most significant weakness at this stage of his oval development showed itself. Restarts at Martinsville are controlled, aggressive, and chaotic all at once. The field bunches up on the half-mile track, and positioning in those first few seconds after the green flag waves can determine where you finish. Every single time the field went back to green, Van Gisbergen struggled to get going. He got stuck on the outside, lost 1 or 2 spots each restart, and simply could not claw those positions back before the field stretched out again. By the end, he had slipped to 12th. He passed teammate Chastain near the final laps to move back to 11th, but that was the limit. He crossed the finish line 11th, 1 spot outside the top 10. His radio message to the crew after the race was straightforward. "Good job. Sorry I couldn't hold on to the top 10. When he spoke to reporters, he was equally direct about what went wrong. "I just wasn't good enough on the restarts. I'd lose 1 or 2 spots every time and then not be able to get them back." The important distinction here is this. Once the field was racing, Van Gisbergen could hold pace with the drivers who passed him. He was competitive in green flag running. The problem was purely the launch off the restart, those first 2 or 3 seconds when the field surged. That is the specific gap that cost him the top 10 finish on this. While Van Gisbergen was fighting for position in the top 12, the front of the field produced its own dramatic finish. Chase Elliott held off Denny Hamlin to win by just over half a second. It was Chevrolet's first win of the 2026 season, and it was Hendrick Motorsports' 31st win at Martinsville, the most victories by any team at any single track in Cup Series history. The win also arrived exactly 11 years to the day from Elliott's first Cup start, which also took place at Martinsville. "We've never had a win this early in the season," Elliott said after the race. For Hamlin, the result was genuinely painful. He led 292 of the 400 laps. He won both stages. He set the fastest lap of the race. And he lost because of a missed shift on a late restart and a potential loose left rear wheel. His crew chief called it a gut punch to lead that many laps and come away without the trophy. There is one wild statistical footnote to the finish. Hamlin actually scored more points than Elliott on the day, 56 versus 55, because he swept both stages and collected the fastest lap bonus, while Elliott earned 0 stage points despite winning race. That is how the 2026 point structure works, and it is a detail worth noting for the championship. An 11th place finish combined with 8 stage points added up to a 34-point day for Van Gisbergen. That moved him to 14th in the championship standings with 174 points. Here is why that number matters significantly. NASCAR brought back the chase format for 2026. The top 16 drivers in points after 26 races advance to the championship hunt. As of Martinsville, Van Gisbergen sits 16 points above the playoff cutoff line. Every single point he collects from here forward is directly relevant to whether he makes the postseason. His improvement at this specific track over the past 2 years tells a clear story. In his 4 starts at Martinsville, he went from 12th in spring 2024 to 31st to 14th last fall, and now 11th in spring 2026. The direction is consistent, and the pace of improvement is notable. Every time I've come here, I've gotten better and better. We got a good notebook now, and I think that is really helping, he said after the race. He also delivered one of the more candid observations of the weekend about the difference between starting up front versus in the back of the field. Well, people race much nicer up the front. When I'm 10th on back, it was pretty aggressive. That quote, delivered with a laugh, actually speaks to a real and practical advantage that comes with strong qualifying. The reaction from NASCAR insiders after Martinsville was direct and consistent. On the Teardown podcast, Jeff Gluck assessed Van Gisbergen's day plainly. He was better than the 23-11 cars, better than the Spire car. That guy is super impressive. Gluck described him as effectively the best of all the non-Big Three teams throughout the entire race day. Jordan Bianchi took the wider view on what this performance represents strategically. These are exactly the days Van Gisbergen needs. Top 15ths, collecting stage points on ovals. Then when you go to the road courses, you go all out and you max it out. That strategy makes particular sense when you consider that Van Gisbergen enters 2026 with 6 consecutive road course wins in the Cup Series. Road courses are his guaranteed territory. Oval survival and point accumulation are what he is building right now. Bianchi also noted how other drivers in the Cup Series view his development. He's doing it, man. He is getting better and better. The contrast within TrackHouse Racing is impossible to ignore. Chastain, who famously wall rode his way to a critical victory at Martinsville in 2022 and came into this race with 3 straight top 10s, finished 16th. Zillick finished 26th. Van Gisbergen finished 11th and carried his team's best result on the day, squeezing out performance that the equipment on paper may not have fully justified. The Cup Series takes the Easter weekend off and then heads to Bristol Motor Speedway on April 12th. Another short track, another test of exactly the oval skills Van Gisbergen is still developing and refining. With 19 races remaining in the regular season and road courses still ahead, the circuits where he is most dangerous, the playoff picture for the number 97 is not just alive. It is a genuine conversation. 16 points above the cut line, improving at every oval he visits, and carrying a team that is otherwise struggling to find consistent speed. Martinsville was an 11th place finish. It was also proof that something real is happening with Shane van Gisbergen in the NASCAR Cup Series. And the numbers, the pace, and the people who watch this sport every week are all saying the same thing.